This episode is brought to you by the generous support of ARCAT. ARCAT is here to remind you as you get ready for AIA 19 in Las Vegas, you don't have to gamble when it comes to finding great product information.
Don't take a chance with user-uploaded BIM files. Use ARCAT's free library of families created by professionals. Why settle for generic or old CAD details when ARCAT has up-to-date drawings of real products?
Don't roll the dice with old specifications from yesteryear and hope the products your project needs are still available. And you can find that at arcat.com. That's ARCAT.com. Visit them at AIA 19 at booth 5735. That's 5735. And thanks to ARCAT for sponsoring this episode of Archispeak.
Neil, do you want to start it?
How do you want to start it?
Just, the next, I was just thinking like maybe this is just introduced as the next episode in our series on technology and in the architectural profession.
I think you just did.
All right. So the next episode in our series, or let's start over again. Okay, so this episode in our series of technology in relation to the architectural profession, we wanted to talk about the future of the design process. And I've got a few different subtopics that I'd like to go over, and I'm sure you guys do too. So
Me too.
we'll try to keep it moving. But the future of the design process, that's a wide open topic. And so, I mean, again, we're focusing around technology. What have you guys been seeing lately that you feel like is, I don't know, disruptive or evolutionary of the design process that we've known for so long? Because last episode we really stepped back and kind of talked about where we've been and the transformation that we've seen, from analog to digital in our careers. So if you haven't listened to that episode, it might be a good primer. We walked down memory lane and talked about all the ammonia fumes that we've sniffed in the past. and now we're really jumping off into what the series is all about and just kind of talking about the transformation that we're in the midst of. And I really do feel like we're in one of the largest transitions that the profession has ever seen. And maybe I'm just saying that because it's right now and it's our, if we own it, it's our transition. But
True.
But I really feel like it's profoundly affecting the profession of architecture, so much so that I think in 10 years, it's going to be almost indistinguishable from the profession that we started in. Whereas right now, I can definitely still see the paths that have led us here. I'm almost certain that that's not going to be the case in about 10 years, unless we get really good at storytelling, which, we definitely like our storytelling in architecture, but we're also not very good at passing the stories down. So maybe it won't be there in 10 years. So I don't know. What have you guys seen that you really feel like is affecting the future of the design process? So not even the now of the design process, but what do you see coming? What do you see in that transition?
I have a question first. How much of 10 or 15 years from now our profession changing just because of the people aging out of the profession?
Yeah, good point. Right?
Right.
I mean, so you're saying the demographics are changing.
Well, so kind of...
Yeah, with the demographics changing, some of the ways that maybe we used to practice change with it.
Well, then let me give you kind of what my last week and a half, possibly 2 weeks, has been like, and how that kind of reflects the transitional nature of at least just the present.
How many contractors are going to get thrown under the bus?
No.
This
This is totally this is more about how we've been working on a project where we've just moved from schematic design into design development, and our clients looking for us to give a presentation, tell them the story of how they're going to be able to. We have to tell them the narrative of our story of the design so that then she can go on and be able to talk to all these different people, all the different stakeholders that are involved with this building. what the story of this building is about. What's the design? How is this forwarding both research and medicine? How does this forward the nature of the mission of the institution? And I'm trying to. The reason I'm kind of is trying to make sure that I don't really say the name of the institution, just because we're still in the early stages of things and going to respect their privacy for now until I'm actually allowed to talk about it a little bit more. But so we've internally, we've been trying to power forward in doing a lot of modeling. We modeled a lot in schematic design, and the reason we modeled a lot more than probably normal, or going back to what we were talking about in the last episode, wanting to model more in the earlier stages of things, is so that we can really tell the story of a lot of different things. Now, the reason that we modeled a lot in this particular case is that we're also trying to develop a budget so that we can get a lot of these stakeholders to buy into the overall cost of this. Now, this is both an existing building and an addition to a very complicated complex of buildings. And so there's a lot of different factors that we have to take into it, not just the design of things, but also the constructability and also the protection of all of the different user groups that are within this thing. This is both a research and hospital facility. And so there's anything and everything that you could potentially think of is of concern to us. The hard thing to do is, when you have complex things like this, is to develop a bunch of narrative documents for the story of your design in a very old school manner, because there are a lot of, there's a lot of interfaces of, okay, we're transitioning from this new building into this existing building. What is that existing building? How is that interface working? And all of these different things. And so where we were struggling with is we were doing it, somewhat as a hybrid of an old school, new school type delivery process, where we had a lot of things pinned up on the walls. We had a few models, but the narrative just wasn't getting there. The narrative we weren't able to really truly tell a story, because we were kind of struggling between preferences of how to present it. Some people wanted it to be a very more 2D, delivery process. Some people believed that it was more of a 3D process where we could, basically go into a VR type thing, or at least, do flyovers or cut throughs and stuff like that of the model to kind of show what the intent of these spaces, or a hybrid of both. And so we sort of struggled with, trying to tell the story until we finally agreed upon one, which kind of occurred in this past week, and it was very successful. But, I think that's where, and kind of the point of me telling this story is that I think we're at this stage right now, and Neil pointed it out, with once people in 10, 15 years from now start to retire and start to move on, the people who are in the profession now that are younger, that are growing up with the newer technologies, that's all they're going to know. So they're not going to know the old ways of doing things. And so those can kind of be put aside, and we can continue to push forward with the new way of both the design process, the kind of the narrative storytelling process, which I kind of think is the same, so that we will be able to get past that. But, right now we're at this weird little crossroads of being able to tell the story right, tell the story clear, especially when you're not only telling the story to your client, to your peers, but you're also telling that story to the contractor. And being able to have the contractor understand the intent of things in a 2D manner, sometimes just, that's normally where they live, and so they understand it that way. But then when you have such complicated interfaces between existing buildings, or change in materials, or, hey, you've got existing foundations and stuff like that, and you're putting in new foundations, but the way that those interface, sometimes it might actually even be better just to kind of cut away and show a 3D view of okay, your existing pile foundations are 50 feet deep. However, to build this new building right next to those 50-foot, piles, you have to do this.
Yeah.
And to show them things like that, that's
a lot of times I think that drawing is not a technical drawing, right? It's a diagrammatic drawing that does convey intent. And I also wonder if the future of our process. Like you said, you're doing a lot of modeling, which I think is great, right? That shows that you have a complete understanding of all of these things. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to straddle the line here between, we have a lot of audience members who don't know any different, and we have a lot of them who come from a long, rich history of the way that we've done things. Mm-hmm. And I'm in no way saying that the future way is better, because we don't know if it's better. And not only that, but there's a lot of things that we should be pulling from our rich history along with us. And so modeling is fantastic because it does give you a full kind of spatial understanding and allows you to convey that message, right? Especially to people who are just used to looking at 2D drawings. But I would also say that contractors are probably adopting this stuff faster than architects are. So I
totally agree with you.
So there's maybe two different, BIM models in the future. There's like the contractor's BIM model, which is constructability, and there's the architect's BIM model, which is intent. And I don't think that they're the same thing. Like I think that you guys are probably spending a lot of time modeling stuff to a level of detail which you don't need to figure out because they're not going to look at that anyway, right? And then there's the intent stuff, which is the storytelling stuff, which is we're interfacing with this old stuff with this new technology, building technology, and they've got to meet like this, and they've got to interface like this. And then it's like, okay, contractor, how do we do that with all of your experience to pull off what we need to pull off here and really establish a trusting partnership? Because that's something that's been missing for a really long time, especially in the public bid process, is the trust, right? The trust is not there. And it's not there by design. It's there to create an adversarial relationship so that the lowest cost and the least can be done, right? I mean, it's crazy to think about that we're designing buildings for the public that need to last a very long time for the least amount of dollars with the least amount of effort. Right?
Yeah.
It's crazy though, right? I mean, if you really just say it out loud, that's crazy. And obviously I'm just talking about the markets that we work in. I mean, I'm not talking about everything. I'm not talking about private development. I'm not talking about residential. I'm not talking about, private money here, because that is a completely different thing. But I'm talking about the public stuff that we're all paying for. That system is crazy broken when you think about it that way.
Yeah. Correct.
So does technology help fix that broken system?
So what I've noticed, I mean, you were talking about delivery of design, Cormac, before we really started the show, and I'm noticing a huge trend going towards design build. I don't know if you guys are, but I mean, delivery models that are more based on partnership early are definitely becoming, I would just say more, they're just happening more often. So I don't know if that's the answer to your question or not, but it's maybe an avenue down that path.
Neil, I'll give you another example of that is just like what Evan said, is things are kind of somewhat trending towards design build, maybe not necessarily in smaller scale projects, but in larger institutional projects that I've been dealing with. It's sort of a hybrid. I think I've talked about this a couple times in the past, but where we will have a CM on board early, basically from day one. We're hired, they're hired at the exact same time.
CM is
on the adventure together.
Construction manager.
Yeah. So they're basically helping our clients develop budgets, develop kind of value engineering and things like that. In this particular case, the project that we had just done our design presentation for, which is kind of, I guess, would be like our end of schematic design presentation, leading into design development, but it's kind of a straddling both of them, early DD and late SD type stuff. So we're at a point now where we're talking about trade partners coming on board to do a design assist. So design assist isn't 100% full design build because it isn't necessarily accurate that those people who are going to be our design assist partners will actually also be the contractors designing it. A lot of times it's very likely that they will be, but it's not always guaranteed. But what you do get is you get basically a shop drawing level set of documents that are being released out, whether it's them basically helping create a set of shop drawings that then become part of the architectural set, or inform us with enough detail and information that, you know, there's really nothing left to chance on the documents that we've put in. It's a very clear, very concise set of documents that is probably more helped generated by the contractors rather than the architects. And that great example is the last, you know, project that I sent out to bid that is a few months away from substantial completion. That's what we did, is we provided our model to the precast contractors, to the steel contractors, to the curtain wall manufacturers, and they helped us generate details and design and basically work out a few like interface issues that we were having between, like, say, the three of those, and because those were the three major components that were the exterior. All it is precast concrete and curtain wall. And so the interface between those two was relatively important, but the interface between those two and the structural steel, again, very important. And modeling, you know, a lot of times, you know, we talked about in the past where, you know, when we'd set a intent documents, more or less, not really full 100% construction documents, we'd put them out there on the streets, and then it would be means and methods, and they would figure it out, and we might get exactly what we were hoping for, and we might not. You know, and here, when we're designing things, we're designing things to really, you know, hoping that as we model them, and we're modeling them correctly and thoroughly, that what we feel like the design intent is what we're going to get. And that's really where this whole design build process is going. I mean, I think back to when we talked with shop architects and in their delivery process. Yep. And how that whole process came about, and that whole building came about in a very collaborative design build process.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a ton of potential here, and obviously it's not perfect. There's a lot of people who hate the design build process. They think that, especially when it's contractor led, right? I mean, it's one of those things where we don't have the control that we want to have, and we're still not brought into every conversation. And so a lot of things get left on the table and never get figured out and don't come out to our liking. So I think that there's lots of room to make this better, but it is interesting to see things going more and more that way, so that there is this collaboration, or at least the potential of this collaboration, to say, here's how we want it to function, look, behave, like whatever the factors are. And then it's like, okay, now you tell us, what's your experience with how we could actually make this work, or what's the best way to do this, or the cheapest way, you know, depending, again, where this thing needs to go. It is interesting to see how that collaboration could work out to everybody's advantage. I think this is also where we start to see the future of the design process really heading towards pre-manufacturing of things, right? So there's lots of people trying to cut architects out of this equation, and then there's some architects who are really pushing the boundaries when it comes to prefab stuff. So I just thought it would be an interesting thing to bring up, because nowadays we're seeing a lot more stuff just being delivered to the site, you know, really complex assemblies where it's not built by hand on site, but it's built in a factory with either by hand or with the help of, you know, obviously jigs and potentially robotics and things like that. So where it is a much more controlled environment. And that could be anything from a panel assembly all the way to entire spaces. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Amazon actually does sell hospital rooms now, and they're prefabricated and they can get delivered to your job site. I mean, there's companies like Katerra who are doing crazy big, I mean, they are pushing the envelope when it comes to quote unquote architecture and design and prefabrication, because the studies have shown that the people who are first to adopt these new technologies or push the envelope really do reap the rewards there, that like substantially higher revenues when it comes to being the first, or the first handful of companies that are pushing the envelope in these different directions. So they really do have the high percentage of revenues if you're first, and if you're not a laggard behind. So I just thought it'd be interesting to point that out as well, because that is a whole other direction that this conversation could go with the future of the design process, is that it's happening. without us.
Sure.
I mean, and
I was going to say, I'm not sure there's a future if
right.
The
design will happen.
Yeah.
It's whether we're going to be involved or not. And I think we cannot rely on the possibility, or we shouldn't rely on the fact that architects are required for a permit at this point anymore. Because anywhere somebody sees red tape, they will do whatever they can to cut it out. Mm-hmm. And the drawing process right now is necessary, but it is a necessary waste in the system, right? Because the building is the thing. And the contractor's delivering the building. So while it takes drawings right now to make a building, that is wasteful in the process. And so that's why I think we are headed towards model-based delivery. But, I mean, hate to say it, but the thing that we spend the most time on, by far, is the thing that a lot of people see as waste in the project and potentially, red tape, right? And they'll do whatever they can to get rid of that.
So let me ask you that, Mr. Doomsday.
Dun, dun, dun.
So say we get to the point where it's a model-based delivery, and you're right, manufacturers and contractors are probably better suited to actually creating the construction documents, the actual documents that they build off of. Mm-hmm. Does it make more sense that our role becomes essentially less the creator of the kit of parts and more kind of like the advisor of the intent of the design?
Yeah, because it goes beyond just the function of the building. It's all of the other things that we take into consideration that we are trained to do to make that thing a reality and make it operate on so many different levels, not just here's the keys to the building, have fun, right? It's all of the other stuff that goes into that, and the synthesis of all those different factors, all the different users in the user groups, the different site constraints, the environmental constraints, the code constraints. There's so many layers of complexity to that. And so I really do think that that's where our value lies, and that's where we should double down and not try to overlap so much with the other valuable members of the team.
I mean, a lot of times we spend so much time, and we all know this. I mean, Neil, we had talked about times in the past and even, off calls sometimes, where, you're killing yourselves going through all these different construction documents and things like that. But if you think about it, if we all think about the bulk of the time that we spend on these documents are essentially creating assembly documents mm-hmm. and not really intent documents. If in fact, we do something like that where we take ourselves out of that process, but help inform creating the intent documents. Essentially it's through design development. I mean, we've worked out all of our egress issues. We've worked out all of our, accessibility issues. We've worked on all of our life safety issues. We've worked on all of our code issues. We've worked on, all of the things that we really need to quantify all of our knowledge, the relationships, our juxtapositions of this mm-hmm. space to that space, and all of the other
the way
things
the systems interface with that, all that stuff.
The way and the way that all of the systems interface. But do we really need to actually do the construction documents, the instructions, the kit of? Do we need to, as I said on the last show, do we need to create the IKEA catalog? The assembly thing. I mean, that's honestly better suited to getting a bunch of contractors in the room or manufacturers in the room and say, okay, curtain wall A guy, you're going to be interfacing with this manufacturer and this material and this product and this and that and all of the others. You guys all need to work together to figure out how all of your stuff interfaces. Here's the intent. This is the design direction. This is, all of the constraints that we have to it. Go.
Yeah, and I think if you did get that whole team together on the same page, this is ideal blue sky engineering here. I mean, it's the goal is to deliver the most value,
right,
for everybody at that point, right? I mean, we're going to do it as efficiently as we can. We're going to save money where we can. We're going to spend money where we need to to deliver the best thing for the client for the most amount of time. And I think it would give us more ownership over the lifetime of the building, which is a good thing for the client as well, right? We're trying to deliver something that's going to last, something that's flexible, something that could get upgraded, get the operating system of that building upgraded over time so that it can perform even better.
Yeah.
I think if you had everybody thinking about it like that from the beginning, that there would be better architecture in the world, which would affect
So
more people. And that's kind of what I want to bring it back to. The goal of, I think, a lot of these processes, we're constantly looking. If you're thinking about the users, and I'm talking about our staff now, you're thinking about the people who are coming into our profession out of school. They understand that if they can automate something, it gives them more time to do the thing that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who work in our offices who don't think like that. And so they're fighting against that because they want to hold on to the way that they've always done it. But man, if I can write a script that's going to automate 8 hours of something every week down to 5 minutes, and so that I can do something that I really want to do and not draw that whatever, toilet room details. Yeah. So then I'm going to do that. And I think that that's all leading toward giving us more time to spend on a project that's going to deliver more value to a client in the future. And really, that's where everything's headed, right? Do more with less. I mean, you've got to do that. If you can't do that right now, if you're stuck doing it the old way, then I hope you have clients who are willing to pay for that, because I think the majority of the world's moved on, and they're definitely saying, well, they're used to looking at finished products, and that's what they want right now, and that's what matters. And so that the drawing process is very wasteful to them.
Well, I'm glad you brought it back to that, because the two things that popped into my head when you were talking about these is, I guess let's just call it the negative, is that going to this type of a process, we don't want to lose control. And that's probably why we are still doing this type of a process rather than the more automated type process that you can look at the positive.
It's very amygdala based, right? It's like, we're going to die.
Yeah.
We got to hold on no matter what. Yeah.
But I mean, so then I started thinking about, so we give up that control. What do we get out of that? What do we get out of it if we give up the control?
Yeah, what kind of freedom
of doing
is there?
Those kind of things. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It frees us up to actually do more. And then you look at the positive of that and I'm being optimistic here, is that it gives us the opportunity to pursue more projects that are architecturally designed rather than a bunch of builder design stuff.
Yeah, I think right now you're penalized for spending more time on the project just because of the way the fee structures are set up.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's how can I do the same thing that I've always done with less time because the fees are lower. And you get penalized. Like you cannot put that time on your time card, even if you spend it there. Okay, right? So, but you can't put that on there because you can't even make it look like on paper that you spent more time on that project, because that's a penalty on the profitability of the project within the firm that you're working for, which means you're not going to get a bonus, which means that you're an inefficient worker, which means all kinds of crazy political and psychological things in the profession that we work. But if you were to flip that model and say, I can automate the crap out of this thing, I can hand off the stuff that we are not going to do because we're risk averse, and that's not adding value to the project, so that I can spend more time creating a better, more valuable product for the owner. I mean, and you're going to chase more projects that are going to allow you to do that because you're not spending that time doing those drawings. This is just real big picture stuff, but that it sounds like that's the direction that we should try to own as a profession, not just a one-off firm here or there who's willing to take on something different.
Yeah. So the hang up that I see, or the roadblock to that, is liability, because I don't know if anybody has mentally wrapped their minds around, okay, well, what does that mean from a liability factor? I mean, if I'm giving up, and to be quite honest with you, if you really look at it, I feel like it's more of a release of, a reduction in liability, than kind of like the increase, where we literally design to the nth degree and then are held liable for every little bit and piece of it, where it would be better suited to put that liability factor on, those that are building it, that are interfacing it and stuff like that. But it's going to be kind of, and I say that it's hard for people to wrap their mind around it on a liability factor in every case, from the owner who's saying, okay, my building leaks, who do I blame? Mm-hmm. From, the contractor says, okay, well, this structural calculation failed, who do I blame, kind of thing. And so there are all these different, factors behind all of this stuff that I think, everybody's going to say, well, this is why we don't do it. And this is why we don't do it. And this is why we don't do it. But in honesty, there are so many pluses for us to do something like this, especially on the architectural side of things, where it frees us up. Say we, do something like this and move into that kind of direction, where we take buildings through the design development phase. So now we've got a fully realized, somewhat flushed out, or at least fully flushed out to the point where we're ready to, build our kit of parts set of documents, so that the contractors and the manufacturers and everybody else has full design intent of exactly what we intend for this building to do and be. And 9 times out of 10, through design development, all of the structural calculations have been created, all of the mechanical loads have been, done, and all of this other stuff. So, we've thought through all of that holistically throughout the entire building. And so, say we get to that point. Okay, so then we pass it off to the contractor and the manufacturers, say a CM delivery process. So we give it to them, and then they, go through the shop drawing process of all of that. That frees us up to then go on to the next project and basically do the same thing. And so, say we have all of these projects where, rather than taking them all the way through, we're still involved with construction documentation, but it's more of the review process during the CD phase that switches from being CDs to switching to the submittal phase. Mm-hmm. And then we're back on, kind of like full-time for construction administration, just, review of everything and how it all pulls together and stuff, where that frees us up to move on to the next project to do the same thing. And though it may reduce our overall profitability, or not profitability, it reduces our, actual like percentage that we get off of that project. But if we're only doing, say, 1 project or 2 projects of this large magnitude throughout, let's just say, a calendar year, and we reduce that, say, okay, now we can do 1 of these projects every quarter, now we've just doubled, or we're back at the point where we're either at the same profit margin for the year, or we're slightly ahead of that profit margin for the year, because we're able to do more projects with less risk and liability on our shoulders.
Well, call it a wash. Right?
Or call it a wash.
It doesn't matter, because I think in the end, you will be doing more work because you are providing more value, and people like that.
Yeah.
So they'll be spreading the word.
But you're not like spending all of this time on construction documentation.
Correct.
So,
you're shifting it. You're just shifting it.
But exactly. You're shifting it to where, let's be honest with you. Especially now, if we're going to be moving towards the more modeled delivery-based process, and we see that happening often now. I've seen it in the last 3 projects that I've done, that if you do that and you spend that time, you shift that time. Like I said, right now we're so still geared towards the old delivery method of 20% SD, 20% DD, and then this whole big chunk of it's spent on CDs and then a little bit on CA. But if you shift a lot of that CD stuff forward to the SD and DD, mm-hmm. you have a fully flushed out building that's, you can have your full set of specs off of your DD instead of, okay, now I've just got these outline specs at DD, but then I'll get, to the full specifications at the end of CDs. Well, really, if you've spent the right amount of time on design development, you're able to actually have a fully realized set of design documents with all of your systems in place and understood exactly what you want from not just the architectural side of things, but from everybody else. You should be done at DD.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. So what other kinds of things have you guys seen that are really, you feel like they're really affecting the future of our design process? I mean, are you seeing technology? Are you seeing like a different attitude in people? Are you seeing different kind of neat ideas from leadership? I mean, what else are you guys seeing?
Well, what I do see is I see that the clients are expecting more.
Totally. Just had a fascinating conversation yesterday because one of our design teams who's designing a whole high school campus, they're in schematic design and they're delivering like weekly fly-throughs because it communicates the project the way the client wants to see it. And it's driven by client expectation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Full 3D, Enscape, fly-throughs. They're bickering over the color of the leaves on the trees, which is ridiculous, right? Because it shouldn't be about that. and all the diversity of the entourage, instead of talking about the architecture. But
well, I guess in a way you could say that that's okay if that's where the client's focus is in there.
It's interesting for sure. It's interesting.
I was just say, well, at least they, and then if they're like, all right, the tree's great. Like, so how about the building?
Right.
Neil, curiosity. I mean, because I know that you do a lot of like developer based stuff. I mean, what are some of the developers looking for when you go through like the design process? I mean, what are they expecting to see?
It's an interesting question. I think that a lot like you guys are saying, everybody wants more, better, faster.
Yeah.
So how do we deliver that? I think there's a challenge in shifting what you guys were saying about shifting the construction drawing process to either the contractors or more collaborative process. I'm not sure, but I think one of the functional sides of that is when I think of when firms hire people, they tend to come in with little experience, certainly of the construction process and working in an office. And they're often given the task of working on construction drawings. So if the future of our industry is moving towards where you guys were discussing, that shift of where, I mean, that may work for people mid-career, right? That all three of us are at, where, okay, yeah, that we can see that moving in that direction. But however, what does that mean to the younger professionals that are just starting? What is their role to play if construction documents moves away? And I understand what you're trying to get at, which is it's a wasteful process.
But it's necessary. Yeah,
but
it's necessary waste at this point.
It's a necessary wasteful process, but how do we make that better? And I think you guys are exploring some really interesting ideas of making that better. I just wonder how that affects people coming into our industry. And if they have to come in, if that goes away, how do they come in? And then how do they learn, or does that chunk of the workforce move towards the contractor side? And if that's true, we're a dying industry at that point.
Not really, because if you think about it, I mean, it opens up a opportunity for architects to work not necessarily in just their traditional architectural office, but now, architects have a greater value on the construction site because they're able to be there. Because, I mean, we've got I've dealt with a lot of architects on the CM side of things.
Yeah, but Cormac, you're always talking about that, or you've always talked about architects need to understand how to build or how the buildings go together, right? And you're always a proponent of that. And if you're saying that how can we be the experts on, on the job site or in the office doing schematic design and design development when you've never even done construction drawings to understand how anything goes
you
together?
do construction. You don't do construction drawings.
So actually, and that was, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the things that if you didn't bring it up, I was going to bring it up, because it seems somewhat hypocritical for me to say one thing but then preach the other, and it's not. I mean, I totally agree with you, because I truly believe that the biggest disconnect that we have right now in the profession is because it's back to that whole weird transitional phase of things. Because like right now we've got this great technology and a lot of like practitioners of the technology that don't really fully understand the constructability of a building. And then we have a lot of people who understand the constructability of a building, but don't really understand the technology. And so again, back to that whole thing about the, that weird transitional phase we're in. So if you're able to step away from, and Evan said it perfectly, if we're able to step away from the construction documents and you get them out on site and they can understand what each of those, so I do see, and here's where I'm torn. I do see the value of doing construction documents so that you can see exactly how all of the systems go together. But to be quite honest with you, we spend a lot of time during design development doing that very thing, that a lot of times the CD phase of things really is more of just like documenting things and like noting things up and just, doing a few fine details here and there, or, okay, now I get to do all these like little soft details and alignment stuff and little things like that. But the bulk of like the big system picture is done in design development, that I think we wouldn't necessarily be losing that. But the biggest thing is I'll say from just my recent experiences that I've had people who've worked on projects with me who, when we get into construction administration, I'm usually the one kind of taking over construction administration to a point, not necessarily all of it. To a point, I'll be leading a lot of the effort of construction administration, whereas they don't ever really go out there and get out on site and stuff. We need to get everybody out on site so you can really see. And to be quite honest with you, I think you take a set of DD documents, good, well put together DD documents, and that's
a model. How about a model?
Yeah, a model.
Yeah.
When I say documents, I don't necessarily mean like sheets, the 2D piece of paper.
Right.
It's whatever that delivery process is.
It's the documented design at that point.
Yes, but if you can get them out onto site with that, I think, and then you can start to see all of this stuff and start to work through all of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's really honestly where the value of their education in learning how things go together, how things get built, how things are put up on site, and what the challenges on site are, so that it can best inform their design. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I don't think the value of construction administration informs construction documentation as much as it should be informing design.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, oh, I'm going to, I'm going to do this, 12-foot, 8 floor to floor. And then, my structure is going to be 6 inches deep. And then I'm going to have these big 10-foot ceilings. And then you start to do the math and you're like, that doesn't work.
Right.
You should have never drawn it that way, because you just know it won't work.
Yeah. And I think really to kind of get back to Neil's question, like, how does this actually work in the office? I think it's a team of, or a segment of the group is they're generalists, right? The leadership is generalist. They understand the whole process, and that comes from all sides of the table in this kind of ideal world that we're painting right now, right? It comes from architecture, it comes from construction, it comes from finance, it comes from all these things, and they understand the big picture. They understand what it actually takes because they've done projects, backed up by a team of experts, right, who really know what they're doing in their domain. And the team has to be all of those things, because if you just have somebody who's really good at design computation, right, they don't know anything about constructability,
Right.
You have to have the generalists overseeing this whole process. And honestly, just like to bring it back down to how does this work in the future, Neil? It is through mentorship, and it is through putting crap on the wall and getting it off the screen. Because I agree with you that it is almost impossible to train somebody who has no quote unquote experience in construction documents. Because there are no boards to look at things holistically, and there's nobody walking around the room looking at what everybody's doing. And so you've got to really up the way that the collaboration happens in the office, and put stuff on the walls and get people commenting and talking about it and excited about the project and owning the project, the whole project, not just the little piece they're working on. Because that's what I see time and time again. Is that you've got a computer over there facing that way, and I've got a computer over here facing this way, and we don't see what each other's working on, and we don't know how my work impacts their work, especially if they're outside of the office or on another team. They're in another entity, they're in the contractor's office. And this is where the big room idea really does come into play, right? We're going to solve these issues together right now, and you can't leave until it's solved. It really is pushing back in the direction of just put it up on the wall and let's talk about it, right?
You just gave me a brilliant idea for this project that I'm working on right now, which is, so when we started this off by talking about, technology, the design process, the future of the design process and things like that. And then we've kind of talked about, we've done all of these different circles of different ideas and things like that. I started to somewhat daydream about, okay, the reality of the process right now is it's not me walking around looking down at boards, sitting here saying, oh, this isn't right or this isn't right. It's everybody kind of somewhat working in a very compartmentalized bubble.
Yep.
That they're looking at their screen, I'm looking at my screen, and not all the time are we really actually conversing and communicating well enough together. I set up a Bluebeam studio session, and everybody's invited, and we dump all of the documents in there, and I start redlining through things, and then periodically we sit down and we talk about, why I made that particular comment or red mark or something like that, and what the change needs to be, and why that, the intent of that change and all that other stuff. But I think the value honestly would be is pulling the people who are, let's say, we've got a team that's doing core and shell right now for this project. And so pulling in the core and shell team and having our set of documents that we've just generated, and whether it's, sitting down and doing a working session with Bluebeam or, sitting down and doing a working session in Revit itself, but everybody basically projecting the work that they've been doing up on the wall, and everybody doing a constructability critique, a design coordination with constructability critique together to understand what all of this is. And it's not a critique of something just like, God dang it, Evan, what the hell were you thinking when you drew this? It's more of like, okay, so Evan, you drew this and this is great, but how does this, let's talk about the next steps of constructability or design, and how, you drew this for constructability, but now you've gotten completely away from the design intent, or vice versa.
Right.
And how do we pull all those things together?
And somebody's got to oversee that whole process who understands the project, right? And what's also an interesting kind of approach to that, I think, is, I don't know if you guys have heard about the way that Japanese corporations structure their meetings, but it's interesting in that the leadership speaks last. And the reason is because they want to give the young professionals the opportunity to say something without feeling like they're ever stepping on a senior's toes or going against something that a senior just said. And I think that's awesome, right? Because it puts the onus on them to tell the story of why do they think what they think, without having to feel like they need to politically bias themselves towards or position themselves towards one person or another, or please somebody in a meeting based on something that's already been said by a senior. And so when you were just talking about that, and you're talking about projecting something on the wall that you've just drawn, you give them the opportunity to speak first and talk about why, and then guide the process from there. I think that, and again, we're talking larger firm, kind of big team on a project, definitely not addressing the single person on a on a custom residence kind of a thing. So sorry about that, folks. But I mean, this really, to me, I mean, we really are talking about the future of the design process, and I think that's going to be led by these types of projects, and it will trickle throughout the industry into other ways. There's so many other things that we could talk about here, but I think maybe we save those for our next episode when we actually get a little more nuts and bolts into technologies that we see happening, and the types of staff, like what the types of staff we need are to move into the future of the design process. What do you guys think?
Sure, that'd be great.
Cool.
Sure.
All right, that's let's call it a wrap right there.
Rap
music. I don't know if you guys have seen these new Microsoft Surface hubs that are coming out. They just announced it this week, like they're shipping one pretty soon. But, it's a fully interactive 10 touch point TV that's like 55 inches and 85-inch one coming out next year. But like when you're talking about putting shit on the wall and being able to draw on it and have that stuff just immediately available to everybody on the team anywhere, it's pretty awesome stuff.
It's only $25,000.
This is getting to the point where
it's Minority Report.
This is my jam.
Yeah, they are expensive, Neil, but I mean, like, on some levels, you can't like get off your 20-inch screen, right?
Shit, this is exactly where I want this to go. Is honestly sit there, because we're such, we're tactile design. I mean, we're tactile profession. I mean, we want to sit there and we want to touch stuff. We want to like point at things. We want, how many times I spend more in conversation on, like in design meetings and stuff on my feet, walking up to the screen, pointing at the screen, talking about.
Do you touch the screen? Through. Are you a screen toucher?
Oh, I'm a screen toucher. Sorry, man. On
some level, I get it. I mean, you just said it. You're a tactile person. So, you got to touch the thing.
But here's the thing: is that so I'm sitting here and I'm trying to point, and I'm like, pointing through.
Damn fingers off the screen.
Well, this is a projection screen because we're doing it large scale, like this Surface Hub.
Okay.
But but we're sitting there and we're talking through, and what's great about it is that when you got the client, she's getting up and she's walking over there, and because she's she's a design architect as well, and she's brilliant and knows exactly kind of like what she wants, and she's trying she does a great job of like not like forcing her opinion necessarily on us, but expressing her experience on us, which I love it to a point. But then sometimes you're just like, yeah, we got this. But then, it's just like, no, but sometimes we don't have it. And that's where, we listen to the client, we listen to her experience of things. And then we kind of, meet in the middle. But, what's great is then, I get up and I'm like pointing through things and all this other stuff because, I can sit there and I can explain it, but I can also, explain and show at the same time.
Totally.
And, because we are all visual learners, and, it's just like a lot of times when you hear clients and they say, I don't see it, I don't understand it, can you explain that so I can like visualize it? Yeah, but I can also visualize it for you. Like I can say, I'm talking about this datum line that kind of sets different program, that kind of divides all of these different programs. And I can say datum line all I want to, but
nobody gets
they
it.
don't understand what the hell that means. So I can sit there and I can say, this line right here, see this line, this wall right here is the datum line that separates this research, this, wet lab research facility to the computational. And this datum line right here translates into the exterior. And how does our exterior respond to, all of the different separation between the program on the interior, and how does that translate through, and what does that mean both, in our actual physical interior spaces and our physical exterior spaces, and talk about it and walk through and show them what all of that stuff means by touching the screen, or being able to like rotate things around, or cut a section in Revit and say, okay, this side of the section is this. This side of the section is this.
So,
and this is what you see when you cut through there.
The future of the design process is touching the screen. Sweet.
It's touch.
Hands-on.
So that means that you need to get fingerprint-proof screens, because I'm going to be mucking that shit up.
Right. Cool. All right, well, let's... I don't know if that works for the after show. That might be enough.